Welcome to the Living Medicine Podcast, where we talk about ethical medical use of psychedelic psychotherapy, teaching skills, examining the issues, and interviewing interesting people. Now let's start today's show.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Sandy Newis of the Living Medicine Institute, and this is the Living Medicine Podcast, where I interview interesting and influential people in the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy space. And this is sponsored by Living Medicine Institute, which is a business where we provide content, training, and resources for clinical and medical professionals interested in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy with a specific focus on ketamine. And just shameless plug, we do have a retreat coming up in April. So please check out that if you're interested in that. So I am excited today to have Peter Corbett with us today. So Peter is Kapstone Clinic founder and executive director. He's been working in the mental health field for 35 years. He has 2 postgraduate degrees, a master's in counseling and consulting psychology from Harvard and an MSW from Smith College. Major background in holistic mental health and transpersonal psychology. He's been a therapist in many different settings, psych hospitals, community mental health agencies, batterers treatment, emergency outreach, and has a private practice for 30 plus years in Northampton, Massachusetts. And what I've come to understand is one of the things that's important to Peter is that he was a community organizer in Burlington back when Bernie Sanders was mayor. And I've recently come to realize that that really informs his work in the field, and we're going to talk some about that. More recently, he completed ketamine-assisted psychotherapy training with Dr. Phil Wolfson, and then joined the Ketamine Training Center, KTC faculty, and became co-director of Ketamine Psychotherapy Associates. He's gone through the CIAS program and is the founder, part owner, and clinical director of the Center for Healing Journeys, a KAP clinic in Western Massachusetts, and the founder of Kapstone Clinics. So welcome, Peter, and thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate having you here. So, so I always like to just start with how I know people. And, you may not even know this. I actually knew you because my friend Cindy Rhodes, who is also a therapist and a KAP provider, went through CIAS with you. And she was always like, you should meet Peter. He's cool. And you two have stuff in common. And so that led me to Menla, where I did the Dharma K, the first one. And I very specifically remember meeting you while you were setting up your camper top or tent or something.
Yes. Yeah.
And we were connecting around ticks.
Somewhat of a disaster, actually. Yes.
Yes, that we were both.
Cold. It was an ill-chosen way of sleeping.
Right. I was like, you were like, I will do this. And I was like,
the days were warm, but it was really cold at night.
I know. And there were ticks.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
yeah.
Right. What are you going to do about that? So, but what I most was kind of touched, you were one of the staff helping to facilitate that. And I remember very clearly you doing a kind of a meta meditation, a loving kindness meditation as we came onto the ketamine. And that was very sweet. And I've actually borrowed that. And I open the group session at our Living Medicine Institute retreats with that. So thank you for that gift. And then I also know you because you facilitate the Ketamine Psychotherapy Associates mentoring group, which I'm a part of. So thank you. I appreciate all the different connections. And so again, I'm happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I also like to always just start with, how did you get into the field? And this is kind of a broad question for everybody, but, you are somebody who is pretty committed to this field, as I am. You have a lot of touch points in it. It's not something you do part-time. It's something that seems to integrate a lot of pieces of your life. And so, tell me, how'd you get into it, and what keeps you so committed to this?
Well, I think that when I imagine the answers that you've heard, and probably people have heard many times when we get asked that question, there's always the inherent curiosity that we have all had, particularly in sort of discovering alternative states of mind. And, so there was that in my, high school and college days. But I think that was all kind of background, disappeared. I moved on. I didn't really do any psychedelic medicine really for 30 years. And the thing that really brought it back into the field of my awareness was about, let's see, what's 2026 now? So 2010, my family started encountering it or discovering that within it we had Huntington's disease. And Huntington's disease is one of the sort of lesser known, but one of the big neurodegenerative diseases. So, there's ALS and there's Parkinson's, and Huntington's the one that Woody Guthrie died of. And everybody worried that because it's genetic, people worried, does Arlo have it? And, there was this whole concern, and that's one of the more sort of popular figures that is known to have Huntington's disease, but it's a horrific disease, and it is genetic. So I'm one of four boys in my family, and of the four, two tested and found out that they had it. My brother Joe, when I first did my ketamine training in 2019 with Phil Wolfson, was pretty far advanced in terms of his symptoms, and he died in 2020. So after COVID hit, kind of near the end of that year, when people were still kind of sequestering around, the disease, I remember even there was a lot of concern about going to his funeral and having people being around each other. But he died of a neurodegenerative disease, and so back in 2015, I started exploring psychedelics because I understood them to be, neuroregenerative or potentially neuroregenerative, and I wondered if they might have an impact on on Huntington's. And so I started exploring them, and then of course pretty quickly realized that one of the reasons why they were being kind of brought back into sort of the zeitgeist of psychology and all that was because they're thought to be powerful adjuncts to treatment. So I started exploring it from that perspective, and ketamine was the one that I actually hadn't really heard of much. I was maybe dirty little secret. I was growing mushrooms in my closet at home, trying to and consequently brought various green molds and things like that into my house because I was.
I'm like, were you successful? Did you keep the bacteria out? Did it work?
I did have a few successful runs of mushrooms, but my house has since become very vulnerable to, on moist days to, a little bit of green mold coming back. So I've stopped playing around with that. But ketamine, somebody had mentioned, a friend of mine, a physician, mentioned ketamine, and I went to a program down at Yale Psychedelic Science Research Group that I was attending on a monthly basis, and Raquel Bennett, who runs KRIA, spoke there, and I was very moved and intrigued because I had really never heard of ketamine, and then like 3 months later, took Phil Wolfson's fundamentals training, and was in the middle of that experience because we did have the experience of the medicine. I said, not only is this one of the more powerful experiences I've ever had in my life, but I want to bring this medicine to the world because I could just deeply feel through the experience how powerful it could be for healing. And so since then, I joined the faculty probably the next training. I basically said, Phil, I'll go get you cups of coffee, and if I could just come to the training. And pretty quickly I was on the team, and very happy to be a part of what I feel is one of the more powerful movements in psychology these days, is the introduction of these medicines.
Totally. I love that. So what an interesting journey. So from, neurogenerative to your aha moment, like I must do this. That's an interesting kind of entry
Yeah.
point. Um, Kind of, building on that, when you and I talked, I always talk to people beforehand, and you said something that I really appreciated, and then I kind of want to move into some of the more kind of nuts and bolts about ketamine and the work you're doing to bring this, to kind of validate it with the world. But you said something I really appreciated, and I wanted to just kind of share that. You said psychedelics expand one's capacity to accept difference. And so, let's kind of talk about that for a minute. Could you say more what you think? And then even if you could put kind of a clinical bent on it, like how does
Mhm.
psychedelics, how, right? Like in what way? And is that something we can work with clinically? Because, we're both involved in training clinicians.
Yeah.
So is that something we can work with?
So I think when people walk through the door of a therapy office, they are there to change something. They're trying to fix something, change something, get out of. Often it has to do with habitual stuck ways.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think that uh, we are starting to realize the degree to which a lot of mental illness is about hyper-rigidification in terms of our neuronal networks and the patterns that, like the patterns that get um, automatically sort of uh, fired up in our minds. So if you imagine that our brain is full of potentiality in terms of networks or constellations of networks, lighting up, and those evoking certain experiences, whether they're inclinations for behavioral or enacting some sort of behavior or
Mm-hmm.
um, emotional thoughts, recollections, going over pieces of our history. They're all about um, baked in neuronal network firing up of constellations, and
Mm-hmm.
and and that change is really, I think, about opening up the the network to new potential uh, like getting beyond or getting below those below the automaticity of it, so getting out of the rigid tracks that fire up.
I mean, I have a friend, this is like his name is Rob Meltzer, and he's only peripherally involved in the ketamine world. But we used to work in kind of wilderness and outdoor therapy together, and he would call it like the Grand Canyon, that
Yeah,
we get
yeah,
these patterns and these emotional patterns and these relational patterns, these
that's
behavioral
right.
patterns, like they go deeply down in the Grand Canyon and it's difficult to get out of them. Is that kind
Yeah,
of what you're saying? Like we get
people
under
talk,
these trains and it's hard to get out.
absolutely. So a lot of people talk about it as ruts, sort of
Mhm.
neurological ruts or stuck
Mhm.
patterns, habits. Um, People talk about it as that, pathways in the forest that's been overgrown and there's no other, and it appears like there's no other way. And then you take a psychedelic medicine, and what you're doing is, I think, in a sense, um, uh, giving the whole field a neurological reset or opening up the possibility. So you have this medicine that's flowing through, and
Mm,
it has a neuroactivation potential
mhm,
as it kind of flows across the neuronal networks, and ketamine because of its neuroactivation capacity as a neurotransmitter modulator, uh, basically gets the whole thing going, and probably more so than most medicines. I think it's like
yeah.
70, 80%, 90%. People throw out different numbers, but they're all really high in terms of the number of um, neurological networks or synaptic
Mm,
connections that get activated.
Mm-hmm.
Compared, and even the sort of classic psychedelics, the non-glutamatergic, ketamine's
Mm-hmm.
glutamatergic, and then the classics are all serotonergic, so they're serotonin based neurotransmitter activators, and those, they talk about 35%, 25 to 30%, so ketamine's very, very wide opening. And you think about getting out of ruts, you open up the possibility of change, because of all these dormant networks or dormant neuronal synaptic connections that have been sleeping for years and years, probably at this point, because what fires wires and what doesn't fire gets kind of sleepy and kind of grows cobwebs in there. And I think that when people come out of a medicine session with ketamine, there's this sense of awakening. They might be a little fuzzy, but that's just because they're so much has been activated that they can't
Yeah.
focus on any one thing. It's more sort of this kind of this masking quality, because focus requires specificity, but
Mm-hmm.
but the overall activation creates a certain fuzziness for a little while until that wears off. The fuzziness itself is based on this this full opened, awakened quality, and then that's the neuroplastic field. The
Mm-hmm.
the windows are open at that point, and and the reason why I think therapy is so important afterwards is because that's when we step in and say, now who do you want to be? Like what? And that's where you're kind of subverting the old rigid patterns. All the ruts have kind of, even if they're still there,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like you've rounded the corners. You've made
Right.
it possible to kind of crawl out of the ruts and kind of
Mm-hmm.
stand above it and look. When you ask the big questions of meaning at that point, like what do you want to be? What are the patterns that you want to transcend? Who have you longed to stirred inside to become?
I
And
love that.
then you're starting to reauthor self in a sense.
Mhm. Ooh, that's a good phrase. Starting to reauthor self. That's a nice one. I'm going to write that down. But it's interesting because I have borrowed a phrase in my own work from our, mutual friend, Dr. Ron Siegel, who I really
Yeah.
respect. And he talks about it in mindfulness practice, like, creating a life that maximizes the likelihood that you're going to stay in mindfulness. And that's kind of, to me, like a bridge. Like I tell my clients, like, try to build your life during the time that you're doing the ketamine work. I mostly do series in my clinical work so that you can maximize the likelihood that you're going to be able to make these changes and,
Mhm. Yeah.
stay in that more expanded state.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So I love that.
One of the things
So,
that I think, just to add, since you're bringing up Ron, I mean, the whole field of mindfulness, which is, I think, really important, um, is about keeping that open field. Like when you are in the presence, in present moment, you're actually you actually can physiologically measure that you are in a calmer state, a more open state. Um, and I think that the next step that I really care about is this other thing, which is then about is consistent with that idea of reauthoring, which is
mm,
about connecting to what one might call your higher self, and higher self is really, it's a little bit flowery, kind of woo-ish term, but it's
okay. But I think it ties into inner healing intelligence. It ties into a
that's
lot of
right.
things. Like I
And
think it's, you know, our subconscious knows
yeah,
what we need,
yeah, yeah.
to
And
evolve into a better version of ourselves.
And that better version of ourselves is based on a lot of things that we've grown up with, uh, and so there's the way we are pushed and constrained and directed by our history, but there's also a way that we've had experiences that have conjured up what I would call ideal models, or Jungians might talk about them in terms of archetypes, but core energies that we can activate and imbue that open field that gets created uh, with so as to set new ruts, but new ruts that are actually about a more direct um, uh, track toward that point on the horizon that you really want now. That's based on who you want to be now, as
Right.
opposed to just trying to get out of the old ruts.
Well, it's interesting because that's like I work with the concepts of expansion and contraction a lot, which I actually
Yeah.
got a like spiritual study and mindfulness study, teaching clients to be able to stay in a more expanded state. But the first thing you have to do is experience it.
Yes.
So I think like what I think one of the things I think is so interesting is helping clients become aware.
Yeah.
Because like, you and I have talked about trauma in the past, how trauma just contracts us back into fear, which is essentially habit and gets us
Mhm.
back into those old, ruts. So how can we feel safe in that more expanded state, in that new version of
Yeah.
ourselves as we're solidifying that, I think
Yeah.
is, just super interesting to ponder. And how
Well,
can we create a life that maximizes that potential? And how can we support our clients with that?
yeah. And I think that you might be able to report, having sat with a lot of people who've been inside the medicine experience, how
Mhm.
safe people often feel. Like there's
Mhm.
with kind of even light dosing, people can have a very profound sense of just kind of deep relaxation, letting go. And
Well, and I find it interesting, and this just kind of takes it in a different direction, but I find it so interesting, like when people do have the fear, like, this is one of the things that I work with a lot and teach. Clients think it's just, I'm just afraid, I might be dying, or what is happening, or I'm afraid to let go. And, if we can kind of map how that fear, how the way in which it shows up and the form that it emerges in, and then draw that parallel process out to the way fear and anxiety and stress and defenses show up in their life, I think that can also be really
mm,
powerful learning,
yeah,
like the process of working through and getting into the ability to drop in, and how is that a parallel to life
yeah,
is something I just find fascinating.
right. That's right.
So this is really cool because, like a lot of the people on talk about a lot of different psychedelics and we lump them all together, but I'm pretty ketamine specific for a lot of reasons. I have a lot of awareness and interest in other medicines, but really I love and appreciate ketamine for a lot of reasons and
Mhm.
have found very profound effects with it. And it sounds like you have as well, and you teach about it. And so let's talk about why ketamine, a little bit more about why ketamine and KAP is
Mhm.
awesome and how we can do it well. But I want to also just kind of start with like you've worked with Dr. Phil Wilson a long time. He is undeniably an elder in the
Yeah,
field and, a mentor to you, I think, and a friend and a, original teacher.
yeah.
So what are just some of the gems that you've learned from him? He's been a guest on here too, but like just what are some of the gems that you've learned from him?
Well, one of the things that from sitting with him and is Phil is he's kind of got he's a walking historical document about the origins of this field, and
Right.
he's worked in Sasha Shulgin's lab back in the
Yeah.
70s. He's
That's a
you
fun
know
fact I did not know.
yeah, and he was part of this th- Shulgin, so Sasha Shulgin and Anne Shulgin together were, they would do this research on these various
Mhm. Mhm.
molecules, and they had a group that was kind of like they called it a research group, but they
They
were
were part of the
basically
lab.
voluntary guinea pigs to try these.
Oh
medicine.
my gosh, I did not. I know about this group, and
And
I did not know Phil was a part of it.
yeah, he says he was in sort of the latter. There were various permutations of this group over time, and he
Right.
was one of the sort of late entries. But as was Rick Doblin, who and MDMA was one of the ones that he had explored,
Right.
and they came across. So Phil is full of stories like that, and he's met sort of lots of key figures. One sort of hero of mine is James Fadiman, who's written a bunch of stuff more recently in psychedelic world about microdosing, but Fadiman was actually he back in the 70s a um, he created the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, and he came up through the ranks of psychosynthesis, and actually my understanding is he went out to he went to Italy and spent an entire month with Roberto Saggioli, who was the founder of psychosynthesis. And so I was over at Phil's house one day and had a question about Richard Schwartz, who started IFS, and I suspected that Schwartz knew a lot more about psychosynthesis than he lets on, and wondered if he had done any training in it. So he said, I said, I bet Fadiman knows, and he said, oh, let me call him up, and he pulls out his phone. And Phil, because he's been around, he knows people like this, and he dials up James Fadiman, and he says, Jim, you around? I got a guy who I work with who's big into psychosynthesis. And he pulls it up, and he just left a message. Then about 10 minutes later, Fadiman called up, and we had a sort of group call and at Phil's kitchen table. So I
Awesome.
got to ask him my question about Richard Schwartz and whether he had any training in psychosynthesis.
Well, and I think that's just, people might not always realize this. And I say it in the training all the time. I'm like, people, this is a very new field.
Yeah,
Psychedelics themselves have been around like in ancient traditions, but in the Western world, in the way, this is not only psychedelics themselves are relatively new, the molecules in terms of the synthesis of them, especially if we're going to go with the synthetics, but widespread use is a very new phenomena.
yeah, yeah,
And, if Phil has like, we can call Phil an elder in the field and he's still alive and he's got these people, and Sasha Shulgin didn't die that long ago. And I've met him,
yeah,
that we're pretty new.
yeah.
Like,
That's right. Yeah,
in
that's
terms
right.
of, and that is both exciting and this like search for the protocol. Like there's a protocol now, but it might not be the same as it is in a year.
Yeah.
And we're all co-developing that. And that's very exciting and can be a little overwhelming. And I think carries with it a great deal of responsibility for all of
Yeah,
us.
there's pressure now to do this right. And I think
Hmm.
that brings us back to the question of ketamine and
Yeah.
why are we focusing on ketamine? And I think for a few reasons, ketamine is very versatile, and
Hmm.
dosing like changes of dose can give you a very, very different kind of experience, and those dose shifts are um, conducive to working verbally in a session. There's I would say that a low dose of ketamine is comparable to what you might experience with MDMA. And can can be a great facilitator of couples work.
Totally.
So a light dose of ketamine with a couple. I've done this a few times,
Hmm.
and where people would be in the same room, either sit with each other while one did it, holding hands and being present, and working with one person as they're under a light dose, or having them both, go into an experience. And generally a light dose so that they can talk afterwards,
Right.
and it really kind of cuts through in a
Hmm.
way that's really powerful. The other thing that's a critical aspect of ketamine is that it's legal, and
Right.
so it's the first one to sort of hit the ground, because it's introduction came, was sort of pre-established, and we're repurposing the medicine from its anesthesiology use
Yeah,
to
people often don't realize that
yeah,
ketamine has never been illegal,
yeah,
right? It's
yeah,
like, it was approved for off-label use, and now the use has expanded. But
yeah,
and I also love the fact that it's predictable in from the perspective of I can
very,
schedule a 2-hour session or a 3-hour session, and it can be pretty clear that people are going to be in and out, and that's just important in running like a practice, which is
yeah,
also a business, and you have more people lined up, right? Which is fundamentally different than the other psychedelics.
yeah,
Um, so, it's interesting that you say about that, the couples, because, one of the things that I'm really believe is that actually ketamine really is a very relational medicine when it's done that way and
yeah,
facilitated that way. And people think like, oh no, it's just go deep internal, but I think that's a dosing issue.
yeah.
And, so I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, all our trainings are done in a group context, and
Mhm.
I think that there is just tremendous power of ketamine use in the group context as a bonding
Mhm.
agent. That
Mhm.
even if people have a period of time where they kind of go off into their own world, and that also depends on the dose. There's a return from a similar kind of field space. It's not necessarily same in terms of individual content that people bring back, but the fact that people have all been sort of dancing in their own individuality in the same field is very, very powerful. And to share together after you've come out of a medicine experience,
Mhm.
what each person uh, felt is I think of it as like walking through a museum together and looking at each person's experience as if you're looking at this incredibly beautiful and unique painting, and then moving on,
Mhm.
and then you hear the next person's. It's like you're stepping over to the next painting, and you're really getting to relish in the sort of art of self. And
Mhm.
it's really quite beautiful, and people feel really seen and honored, I think, in that context, and it's very
Mhm.
bonding. People
And it's
remember it.
interesting because that's like, I mean, that's just ancient wisdom, right?
Yeah,
Go collectively into a non-ordinary state, whether it's
yeah,
medicine induced or utilized or meditation or dance or, vision quest or whatever that might be.
yeah,
And then come back together in community is much more ancient wisdom than I think people really realize.
yeah,
And kind of flies in the face of our like rugged individualism of the United States. So,
mhm, yeah,
yeah, so I know that you are involved in efforts about kind of setting gold standards. And, towards the end of this, we'll talk about your Capstone project, which I know is a lot about that. And, so it's like, can we set a gold standard? What does that look like? I know that you advocate for multidisciplinary treatment models and kind of a union. And
mhm,
I'm aware of the fact that you were on a panel internationally talking about just this. So, can
mhm,
we set a gold standard? What does that look like? How do we handle that in a way that allows for the field to keep evolving?
yeah,
Because like when I was involved in wilderness adventure therapy, there was a lot of, and I see this in psychedelics too, there's a lot of resistance to setting standards because it's like, well, that might not be the way I do it. Because
yeah,
when there's a bunch of people in a new field having success in the way they do it, and it's not exactly the way you do it, like, I don't want you to tell me I can't do it my way. But then there's also this rightness that people get into, like, well, this is the way. Right, which I
yeah.
think is kind of frankly like silly because we're so brand new. So how can we dialogue? How can we set standards? How do we set a gold standard? How do we keep evolving? Like, what are your thoughts about all that? What does it look
Well,
like?
I think that we have to be careful when we think about standards to not confuse uh, treatment innovation
Hmm.
with and sort of the art of relationship
Hmm.
with safety and who is we have an incredible bit of responsibility right now because these medicines do take us into lots of unknown, sort of uncharted territory. both for the individual and also for the therapist who's sitting there watching. Like
Yeah.
we're not, when people dream at night, we're not sitting there next to their bed and watching them dream, but there's a level at which people are, and dreams are not always pleasant. Sometimes they are nightmares. And I think that when you're sitting next to somebody who's having a psychedelic experience, you're
Mm.
sitting next to somebody who, in a sense, is having a wide awake dream,
Mm.
and and people can be um, having lots of beautiful kind of eye-opening experiences. They can also be having terrifying experiences, and we have to learn how to be present with that.
Mm.
And I think that the fact that ketamine arrived through the medicine field, it arrived through emergency rooms and through operating rooms. Anesthesiologists used it on a regular basis. They call themselves the experts on ketamine, and I think that they are the experts on ketamine in that way,
Mm.
as a use for anesthesiology and pain. Um, the there were early attempts at them sort of cornering the market on ketamine and ketamine clinics. When it started being used for mental health treatment, they were saying that they're the ones who should be doing it. However, they're not the experts on psychotherapy. And I think that we have to be honest that if we're going to be using it for mental health treatment, we need to have experts in transference, countertransference, metaphorical thinking, the capacity to interpret symbolisms, and to learn to know about distress as not being something we have to make go away, but actually maybe sort
Mm.
of ride through with people. So there's a lot of skills that are necessary when you're sitting next to somebody who's having this experience that cannot be brought to the table by the anesthesiologist or the emergency room
Right.
doc. I
Yeah.
think that, but I do think because it is a medicine that elevates blood pressure, that has sort of cardio effects. There's, potential. Sometimes it can elicit migraine headaches, or there's some concerns about its impact on people who are prone to seizures and things like that. So there's ways that we need to evaluate it and clear it, and I think have a medical presence
Mhm.
in the process of delivering this medicine. So if we're going to successfully bring psychedelics generally into this field, we
Mhm.
have to have what Phil, I think, wisely uh, coined as multidisciplinary teams.
Yeah.
And from a community organizer standpoint, I believe in also relationship and local based. Those are the pieces that I think are really important. That I'm not a big fan of distance prescribing. So the various meaning people who get their medicine through a 15-minute online Zoom session with very little kind of depth of history taking, and mining their sort of subjective goals and growth and past experiences, some traumatic, past hospitalizations, past medicine. There's a lot of assessment that is unique, I think, to the mental health
Mm.
skill set that is not in the medicals, and vice versa. We need to listen to each other. We need to be working together as teams. So that's why I focused on clinics that are
Mm.
multidisciplinary clinics, locally based, um, uh, and where we're really committed to relationship. And we're not doing evaluations necessarily with, sort of online apps,
Mhm.
where we're content to give them ask questions and give them a 5 answer multiple choice response.
Interesting. Is that how some of them are doing it? You just like
That's
fill out
how,
some questions on an
yeah,
app and call it
there,
good?
there are
Our team will
some.
review and get back to you?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Oh, it sounds like you're doing fine. You're reporting that you're doing you're finding the ketamine useful that we're sending you and you're doing on
Right.
your couch while
No
you're
health problems, no
yeah, that's right.
crises, no hospitalizations. You're good. Here you go. Here's a whole bunch.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of that and so I'm very and the other thing is I think that this is a growing art.
Mhm.
And I think that for young clinicians coming into the field, that we need to have real sophisticated supervision because there's a lot of fields we're bringing together. There's also people having very spiritual experiences, and how much does somebody who's gone through uh, you know, a training, for example, my psych training at the University of Vermont was we were running rats through mazes, and thinking that that was psychology. We
Mhm.
never ever talked about counseling or psychotherapy. Really, it was primarily an experimental psych program,
So
and
interesting.
it was weird. So I had a lot of courses on the biology of
Mm.
of perception, so we'd learn about, the ear and the, visual
Right.
perceptions and things like that. But it wasn't until I discovered psychosynthesis that I even thought psychology was going to be worth pursuing, because that was true therapy to me, was when we were really looking at sort of the transpersonal,
Mhm.
trajectory of transcending, like growth really being about um, uh, discovering a way of being, and then slowly kind of transcending that same way of being that you had developed,
Mhm.
as if through the course of one's life development, we're going through different kind of skins. We're
Uh-huh.
like a tarantula, or like where we actually shed the old skin, we shed our teen skin, and we become a young adult, and then we
Interesting.
become a provider, and then we become an
Totally.
elder, and like
Right.
there are these different skins that we go through that at once are facilitating of a way of being, but then they become constraining, and we go through these developmental phases in our lives
Yeah,
that
that's so interesting because like I'm sitting here just kind of thinking too about like rites of passage, right? Just in
yeah.
life, how, sometimes these rites of passage can be awesome, but sometimes they can be fairly dark nights of the soul and,
Yes, that's right.
can kind of psychedelic experiences and really deep shifts into non-ordinary states and out of those prescribed ways of being, help us kind of see, a new sense of self emerging and experience that differently. So I share that. That's interesting. So we got about 5 minutes left. So just let's talk about, kind of moving into what you're talking about with, clinics and these
Yeah.
multidisciplinary teams and, new providers and what do they need to know and good supervision. And, that kind of leads us to Capstone. So, tell us about your project Capstone. Tell us about that. What is it? How did it come to be? And, what is your hope for that 10 years from now? What do you envision that looking like?
Well, right now there are a lot of great clinics out there.
Yeah.
So people like Phil, or offshoots of people he taught, have gone off and started other training institutes. You're among them. So
Mhm.
there you have the Living Medicine Institute. There's Pratty, there's IPI, there's CIAS, there's Fluence, there's Polaris, so there's all these, I think, brilliant and good training programs. They all teach a little differently, but most of them have focused on ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So they're basically implying that this multidisciplinary model is important and should persist, and that's what they're teaching. But
Mhm.
what we're also looking at systemically is a certain um, uh, dispersion and flourishing of a similar model across the United States into Canada. There now some in Europe that are comparable. There's a great clinic in Barcelona that we've been interacting with called Clinica Synaptica. They're wonderful. We just had this guy last month speak, Mark Ashala, who did a great book on integration, psychedelic integration. So there's a lot of, so it's out there, and the and so because we care about kind of being spearheading or being the icebreaker into the field of mainstream medicine, we need to. I think we need to have a unified voice of this kind of fragmented world of clinics that are all doing a great job. So there's all these clinics doing fantastic work, but we have no unified voice at this point. And so, to me, Kapstone Clinics is envisioned to be a professional association of clinics that are committed to ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, the multidisciplinary, local-based, relational model, and so that we can counter the pure pharmacological use of it. So there's a lot of IV clinics where they just people come in, they get the medicine run through their veins with an IV, and then they get kind of scooted out to the waiting room with a glass of apple juice and bad magazines, and they wait until it wears off and they go home. And there's
Right.
no integration involved. There might be some answer these questions or fill out this questionnaire afterwards, or call us if you need us, or gee, we hope you are in therapy at the same time. But there's not a real sort of orchestration of the experience. And and then there's the distance models where people are trying to make money by selling a lot of ketamine or having it more centralized and doing mailing it to your house. And I just find all of that problematic, because there have been problems that have occurred because they're not that involved and this requires a very individualistic approach. And I know we're almost out of time, but I wanted, so the bottom line is a professional association of clinics committed to this model of presence, preparation, presence and integration afterwards, after the experience. Also supervision, where we're learning from each other. And the other piece that's, I think, really critical is gathering data from all the clinics so that we can keep each other honest, so we can show, gee, this particular approach, this particular technique doesn't seem to help that much, or might only help people with OCD, but not so much with people who have more sort of chaotic disorders, history of psychosis or trauma, or so we'll start to get a feel for whether EMDR works best with this type of patient, or IFS works better with this. So we'll be able to share data together. We'll learn from each other. We can have supervision groups. I want to have a journal that will be about, because it's hard to do when you're involving psychotherapy. It's really difficult to do research that includes psychotherapy, because psychotherapists all do it differently. And so the random controlled trial standard, which is sort of the gold standard of scientific research, is hard to do with psychotherapy. So that's why I think we need a journal for clinical reports. So clinical.
Oh, totally. That would be such a resource for the field.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is a lovely vision. So, if you could give just like a couple sentences, like 10 years from now, like what
Yeah.
do you view the impact of this being? Because it's a big project and it's awesome and I get it and it's needed. So
Well,
10 years from now, you wave the magic wand, you're like, yes, this is what I have done and this is what this is now in the field. Like, what does that look like?
I love the magic wand question.
Yeah,
I use it
right?
a lot
Wave
in therapy.
the magic wand and all things go away and you
Yeah,
get
yeah.
exactly what you want. And this is what it is.
Well, so that we would have developed a legitimacy for psychedelic medicine, and that the standard that we are evolving, and I wouldn't say that we've figured it out perfectly. I think that that's part of the issue, is that that Kapstone would have been played an integral role in maturing the treatment
I love
of
that.
psychedelic medicine.
That's a good. That's a
And that it
good.
would create enough legitimacy so that it is also thought of as an accepted form of treatment.
I love that.
So both of those, so that we can mature together, grow together responsibly, and because we did it responsibly and ethically, it has been easily adopted by mainstream medicine, and the insurance companies are realizing, geez, we have to do this because it works.
Excellent. Well, that is awesome. So, I wrote this down too. Maturing the treatment of psychedelic medicine. So,
And
so
if people
thank you.
want to learn about it, should
Right.
I give them
Sure,
the
of course. How can we find you? How can you learn about Kapstone?
so
And what do you
Kapstone
have coming up? How can people find you?
so
Thank you for the name.
KapstoneClinics.com
Okay.
is the website, and there's a dual organization. So there's Kapstone Clinics and the Kapstone Collaborative. The collaborative is basically the 501c3. So there's a professional association, then the 501c3 is a nonprofit where we're developing the research data sharing piece of it. And we're developing, and that's going to be an educational piece. So we will have a media response team that can be educating the public on safe use of ketamine and inappropriate misunderstandings about ketamine. So things like the Matthew Perry incident, can get cleared up in terms of,
Yeah.
you
Excellent. So it's capstone.com, and there's two tracks. There's a clinic track,
KapstoneClinics.com.
Kapstone Clinics, and that's Kapstone with a C. So Kapstone
No.
Clinic.
Wrong.
Okay.
It is. It's
Okay. Hold on, everybody. Kapstone with a K. Kapstone.
So KAPSTONE Clinics
Clinics.
with a C.
Right.
.com.
And that will be when
.com is with a C as well. We didn't get crazy with all this K stuff.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for your time, Peter. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. And I really appreciate your commitment to making such an impact. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Living Medicine. We'll see you again next time. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.